Hello, my people. Welcome to the Brain Dump Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Boone, and I am so excited you are here. And so I'm hoping that you will come back to this episode over and over and over and over again because I think it's something that you need to hear at some point. The last couple of weeks, I have been sick with the creepy crud funk, the cold, coughing. I still have a bit of a cough, and actually delayed starting this podcast because I didn't have much of a voice. But while I was sick, I was drinking warm tea with honey, which is kind of my go-to. And there's a brand that I particularly like. It's by Traditional Medicinals, and it's called Throat Coat, and it's got all these great herbal goodies in it. And the other thing that I really like is on each tea bag, there's a little quote. And so this was actually one of my first tea bags from the sickness that started weeks ago. And it says, the difference between a flower and a weed is judgment. It was like, oh, that really hits. And so I think about, judgment is a part of life. We do it. We like to say we don't do it. But the reality is the brain judges in like nanoseconds because that's what keeps us alive. But I started thinking about all of that and the judgment that we've got going on in the world today. And that made me think back to, and y'all, this is how my ADHD brain works. It's like, this is connected to this, which is connected to this, which is connected to this. You get it? But I started thinking back to grad school. And when I started grad school at Wake Forest University, one of the things that was really interesting is the very first course that we took was statistics. And I mean, you know what they say about counselors in math, right? Um, so we took the statistics course. And then when we went to our residency, I just realized I didn't tell you guys that I did Wake Forest University online. And so we would go once a year for a long weekend of residency. And so we went to our residency, and it was the first time we were meeting our colleagues in person that we had been interacting with for like the last 8 months. And it came up that the statistics course, giving us that course first, we were convinced was to weed out the ones of us that weren't good, right? That weren't smart enough or, weren't really destined for this profession or whatever we were telling ourselves. And I remember my friend Jamie, like he completed my sentence and he's like, I was pretty sure. And he's like, it was to weed us out. And somehow our professors caught wind of that and they were like, you were already weeded out because you got into the program. And also we don't really like that term weed out. But, um, so we were talking about how we were certain that was the case and the weed out analogy. And so as we're sharing all of this with our professors, someone says, you're not a weed. I remember getting teary about that because it was so impactful for someone that didn't really know you to believe that about you. And so when things would get hard in grad school, as it does, we would say to one another, you're not a weed. And that was just the one liner. And here's the thing. We've been in this arena, my colleagues and I, we've been in this arena for 10 years. And well, we've been licensed for 10 years. Of course, we had 2 years of grad school, but we still will say to one another, you're not a weed. So, that, friends, I'm here to tell you, you're not a weed. I don't know you yet, maybe, but you're not a weed. And so when this little quote came up, the difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment. That's kind of the eyes and the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? And so I started thinking about this tea that I was drinking that probably had what a lot of people would consider weeds. And then I went down the path of what other weeds do we use that really have value? And I came up with a list of like, there's dandelion, and you see dandelion tea, and it's for liver support and it's digestion. And then there's nettle, which I use nettle every day, and it's for minerals and inflammation and hormonal support. And then there's red clover, which is for lymphatic and hormonal support. I mean, plantain and chickweed, and like there are all these things that we use that people would call a weed. And, as you get into your journey, or maybe you've been in a journey for functional medicine and holistic health for a long time, but you'll find there's lots of things that are nothing that are super useful. So these plants that we use for teas, they're resilient, they're adaptive, and they thrive in poor conditions. They support stressed systems rather than appearing delicate. And so high capacity nervous systems, especially healers, adapt beautifully to demand until they don't. This works well until the load exceeds the capacity, and it happens. So, what I'm finding in my peers, what I found in myself, is when they say to me they're burned out, I would have never known it. Like on the outside, they appear to be functioning just fine. When that happens, when that load just amps up over and over and over again, the nervous system protects. It does not fail. The fatigue, the anxiety, the brain fog, the irritability, the shutdown, they're intelligent biological responses. The body will do what it has to do to stay alive. That's the way we're designed. Healers are often labeled a judgment. They're burned out. They're too sensitive. They're not coping. What if these traits are adaptations growing in environments that no longer support them? What if you're too sensitive is exactly what that sensitive nervous system needs? And I think back to particularly women, um, particularly neurodivergent women, particularly neurodivergent women that were diagnosed later in life. How often are we told that we're the problem? How often are we told we're too much? And then we turn around and we're told we're not enough. That's not possible. You can't be too much and not enough at the same time. Um, we we're in this spot where we keep ourselves small, and I did that for a really long time. We keep ourselves in these boxes. We don't step out as who we are because we're afraid of being labeled the weed, and we're afraid we're going to be yanked out of our comfort zone, and we're afraid that we're going to be discarded. A mentor of mine said, and I keep this on my desk, and um I look at it every day, sometimes several times a day. And the quote was, "The parts and pieces of you that hold you back are the things that your fuck yes people love the most." Be big, be bold. You're not everybody's cup of tea. You're not supposed to be everybody's cup of tea. But your people, the people that are depending on you to show up and to help them heal, like they need that part of you that someone else would have made a judgment and said was way too much or not enough or whatever. You know, as I'm thinking about this, and I'd like for you to think about it too, I tend not to be a journal as far as like writing things down. But again, this brain of mine thinks about things all the time. What parts of you have been labeled as the problem? For me, it's my mouth. My mouth has always gotten me in trouble. I speak truth, and sometimes it might could use a little tone development or a little tampering, maybe. You know, my intention is never to hurt somebody. Like that's not who I am. But I definitely say things, and sometimes it's said in such a way to get your attention or for people to hear what I'm saying. Of course, in the counseling room, there is a bit of gentleness with it, right? Like where I'll say to somebody, I'm going to say something that I don't think you really want to hear, but I think you need to hear it. And so I'll prep a lot of times. And then, of course, as I work longer with clients, like they depend on me to say those things that nobody will say to them. And again, not from a place of hurting them, but from a place of like, do you hear what you're saying? And the majority of the time, I'm telling people to stop keeping themselves small. Show up as who you are. And so, again, back to that, what parts of you have been labeled as the problem? And is it really a problem? Or is it that when those parts show up, it kind of forces people to see or to look in the mirror? So whose problem is it really? The other thing I'd like for you to think about are this question: what traits once helped you survive? In my health journey, I look back and the things that showed up as physical problems were often my body's way of adapting. And the holistic health journey is slow and long and sometimes hard, and sometimes you want to give up. I had a colleague yesterday, and I was in a meeting for a functional medicine group that I'm a part of, and she was saying that she had struggled with mold, which also same. And she did I think she said she had done, like, 6 or 7 tests for mold toxicity at various times, and she had done various detox protocols, and she said that she continued to do those labs because she could see the differences, and it kept her motivated, and, if you've ever done any functional medicine labs, you know that they're expensive, and they're not covered by insurance and all that fun stuff. And so probably each one of those mold tests were 3 or $400, and she's done like 6 or 7 of them. So, I mean, we're talking about significant cost here. And she said it helped me continue the journey. It helped me to continue to do the things that I needed to do to show up as my best self. And so it's okay that the parts of you that created the problem were in an effort to preserve and to protect and to help you survive. Like, that's the way we're designed. And I'd like for you to consider, like, what if your nervous system isn't broken? What if you're not broken? What if it's just asking for a different environment? What if it's just trying to let you know that you need something? One of the shifts I've really made in this last year, and as we go along in this podcast, you're going to find I do a lot of taking care of myself. And sometimes I'll joke about if I would have put this much effort into myself as a 20 something year old, I would have been a size 2. And let's be honest, I don't know that the world could have handled me at that point. But, I do a lot of things to keep myself up and functioning. And sometimes I take a break from those things because I get tired of doing all the things. There's expense with it. Um, there's a whole thing called pill fatigue where you're taking so many supplements that it's too much. But one of the things I've really gotten intentional about over the last 6 months is to stop shaming my body for its will to survive. to the ad let my body be adaptive because it's kept me alive, to let to listen to my body. Going into the somatic experiencing training, I've said more than once that I felt like I had a neighbor that was like 48 years old and I just never talked to him. Like I'd lived beside them for 48 years and we had never talked because I thought I had body awareness when I started that. Um, what I actually had was this body adaptation that, again, on the outside, it looked really great and it looked like I was doing the things, but I was ignoring pain and I was ignoring fatigue and I was ignoring um, ways that my body was trying to get my attention. And of course, then that showed up as like chronic hip pain because you sat in a chair all day, or really it showed up as a collapse because I would go and go and go and go, and then I would collapse. And, my migraine headaches used to be like that. I haven't had a migraine in forever. Where's the wood? Knock on wood. Um, but when I would plan to go out of town for a week at the beach, I would plan a day to be down and out and in the bed with a migraine because that's what would happen to me. I would go, and then when I stopped, my body was shocked, and there's the migraine, and it's going to be a bad one. And you're just going to be in bed all day with, a pillow over your face because light hurts and all the things that go with a migraine. And I look back at that and it's like, wow, I had really pushed my body so far and it was doing all that it could. And I think about the years that I did that, and then I think, being on this health journey for the last 5 years, got a long way to go to try to undo all the doings that I did. So when I look through that lens and I look through the lens of not shaming my body for showing up the way it has, but thanking my body for trying to protect me and trying to keep me alive, it's really a game changer. And I'd encourage you to do the same. So, what if your nervous system isn't broken? It's just asking for a different environment. This podcast is not about fixing you, it's about understanding you. And you're not a weed. You never have been. And yes, you are going to be too much or not enough for some people, but those aren't your people. So, welcome to the brain dump. I'm glad you're here.